relationship. I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more.
In the golden age of television, when most comedy variety shows stuck to safe jokes and shiny dance numbers, a pair of brothers burst onto the screen with guitars, grins, and a whole lot of guts. Tom and Dick Smothers didn't just perform. They provoked, questioned, and stirred the national conscience in ways that no other entertainers dared to. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, which aired from 1967 to 1969, was not just another show. It was a cultural battlefield disguised as entertainment. And what happened behind the scenes changed the course of television forever. But the story starts long before the stage lights. The Smothers Brothers' journey began with tragedy. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers Jr., served in the U.S. Army during World War II. In 1941, he was stationed in the Philippines when Japan invaded. While his wife Ruth and their 2 sons were sent away to safety, Major Smothers was captured. He endured the brutal Bataan Death March and was imprisoned in Japan's Fukuoka Camp No. 22. As the war neared its end, he was too weak to work and was transferred to Korea. He never arrived. Some said he was cremated, others claimed he was buried at sea. Of the 110 men who made that journey, only 36 survived. Major Smothers was the last to die. Ruth was left to raise her boys, Tom, born in 1937, and Dick, born in 1938, on her own in California. She worked long hours while they grew up in hardship, and it was that pain that would later fuel their comedy. Tom and Dick's comedic roots took shape in college, starting with a folk music group called the Casual Quintet. Tom played guitar, Dick picked up the bass just to join him, and when the other members dropped out, the brothers kept playing. To fill time between songs, they started cracking jokes, and discovered something magical. The crowd loved it, but their journey from casual jam sessions to national television pioneers wasn't just built on charm. It was built on years of grind, failure, and unexpected twists. The Smothers Brothers quickly realized that their best material wasn't in the music itself, but in the banter between songs. Tom, with his slightly offbeat, childlike innocence, often played the fool, muddling facts, interrupting Dick, and delivering punchlines with wide-eyed sincerity. Dick, by contrast, played the exasperated straight man, trying to keep the show on track while Tom's absurdities threw everything into chaos. It was sibling rivalry reimagined as high-concept comedy. The duo's chemistry was completely authentic because it was authentic. Their real-life tensions bled into the act. Tom really did believe their mother favored Dick, and Dick, in turn, often saw himself as the responsible one. Rather than hide that tension, they leaned into it, and the audience responded with roaring laughter. "Mom always liked you best" became a catchphrase that fans repeated everywhere, not just because it was funny, but because it was real. In an era when most comedy felt scripted and sanitized, the Smothers Brothers felt refreshingly raw and honest. That honesty resonated first in small clubs and coffee houses, where the unique mix of music and mischief stood out among the clean-cut folk revivalists of the late 50s. Their act wasn't polished, but it had personality. Bookers started to notice. In 1959, they landed a 2-week gig at the famed Purple Onion in San Francisco. The 2 weeks turned into 9 months. Night after night, audiences lined up to see the brothers spar, sing, and stumble their way through a show that felt different every time. By the time their debut album The Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion dropped in 1961, they had gone from college curiosities to bona fide nightclub sensations. And yet, the greatest impact was still ahead. Their unique blend of musicality and sibling banter became their signature. Tom played the wide-eyed innocent, while Dick was the straight man. They fought and bickered on stage with lines like "Mom always liked you best," turning real-life friction into heartfelt hilarity. Their big break came in 1959 at San Francisco's Purple Onion. Booked for just 2 weeks, they stayed for 36. At first they made $2 a night, by the end they were earning $2,000 a week. Their first album, The Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion, released in 1961, launched their career. By the mid-1960s, CBS was bleeding viewers on Sunday nights. NBC's Bonanza was dominating the ratings, pulling in nearly a quarter of American households every week. In a last-ditch effort to compete, CBS decided to gamble on 2 brothers known more for their folk comedy club act than primetime appeal. It was a bold move, but CBS was desperate to attract younger viewers, and Tom and Dick Smothers seemed like the perfect solution. Smart, funny, hip, and just rebellious enough to feel fresh. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered on February 5, 1967. At first glance, it looked like just another cookie-cutter variety show. Ed Sullivan introduced him as wholesome, all-American boys. But by the third episode, something was clear: this wasn't your parents' variety hour. Beneath the music and comedy sketches was a current of satire sharper than anything else on television at the time. They were tackling real issues: the Vietnam War, civil rights, censorship, and generational tension. Tom and Dick used humor to cut through political noise, and they didn't hold back. They invited folk singers like Pete Seeger and Joan Baez to perform protest songs, booked counterculture rock acts like The Doors and Jefferson Airplane, and turned sketch comedy into a weapon of cultural critique. What set the show apart was its authenticity. Unlike other programs that steered clear of controversy, the Smothers Brothers leaned in. They made censorship a recurring punchline. One sketch even featured Tom playing a censor, snipping scripts with giant scissors until there was nothing left but dead air. The humor was layered, entertaining to casual viewers, but a clear message to those paying attention: television could do more than entertain. It could challenge. The risk paid off. Within 2 weeks, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was beating Bonanza in the ratings. Young viewers tuned in religiously. Advertisers, at first cautious, rushed to buy airtime. CBS had found its hit, but they had also lit a fuse. The brothers now had a national platform, total creative control, and no fear of stepping on powerful toes. It wasn't long before that combination would start making people at the top very, very nervous. Tom had demanded full creative control, and CBS, hungry for ratings, agreed. That deal turned out to be explosive. The brothers used their platform to challenge authority. They invited blacklisted folk singer Pete Seeger to perform his controversial anti-war song, Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, a not-so-subtle jab at President Johnson. CBS cut the song before it aired. Tom leaked the story. The public erupted. CBS caved. Seeger returned in February 1968, singing the song live and uncensored. It was a landmark moment. 17 years after being silenced, Seeger called out a sitting president on national TV. The show quickly became a lightning rod for political satire, anti-war messages, and counterculture ideas. While most variety shows played it safe, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour opened its stage to the voices shaking up America. They didn't just entertain, they provoked, questioned, and transformed what television could be. Acts like The Who, The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, and Buffalo Springfield were deemed too radical, too loud, or too rebellious for mainstream audiences. And then came the Beatles. On October 6, 1968, American audiences witnessed something revolutionary, literally. The Smothers Brothers aired the Beatles' promotional film for Hey Jude, a cinematic performance featuring a full orchestra and hundreds of extras singing the now iconic chorus. Just a week later, they aired Revolution, its gritty guitar-driven energy blasting through living rooms nationwide. At the time, these clips weren't called music videos, they were promotional films. But what the Smothers Brothers did was historic. They helped introduce the very concept of music video as art to American TV. It wasn't just the big names, they also used their stage to make cultural and political statements. Jefferson Airplane's Crown of Creation was a psychedelic anthem about nuclear annihilation. The Doors performed Touch Me with a full orchestra. Buffalo Springfield sang For What It's Worth, a haunting commentary on unrest and protest. Even the wildly theatrical Who turned their set into chaos, smashing instruments and detonating explosives in a now legendary performance that permanently damaged Pete Townshend's hearing. These performances weren't just musical, they were declarations of defiance. The Smothers Brothers made television dangerous, in the best way possible. While other networks scrambled to appease sponsors and censors, Tom and Dick were handing the mic to the revolutionaries. It was something no one had ever seen before: music, politics, and comedy fusing into one explosive cultural force. They weren't just booking performers, they were curating a counterculture soundtrack. And for millions of young viewers across America, this wasn't just a variety show. It was a movement. And they did all this while making people laugh. The writing staff of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour read like a who's who of comedy legends in the making. Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, David Steinberg, and Lorne Michaels, to name a few. Together, they shattered the norms of television comedy. Sketches about censorship, war, and hypocrisy weren't just edgy, they were subversive. A recurring segment called Share a Little Tea with Goldie featured Lee French as a flower child hippie giving coded advice. Tea was slang for marijuana, and roaches weren't insects. Audiences got the joke, censors did too, eventually. One of the most explosive moments, literally, came during a 1967 performance by The Who on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. What was supposed to be a high-energy musical segment turned into a moment of rock and roll legend. Drummer Keith Moon, ever the showman and chaos agent, had secretly packed his kick drum with far more explosives than anyone had authorized. Even his own bandmates didn't know how far he had gone. His goal, to end the performance of My Generation with a bang, one that no one would ever forget. When Moon hit his final note and the explosives went off, the blast was far more powerful than anticipated. The stage erupted in smoke, fire, and confusion. Shrapnel shot through the air, one piece hitting Moon and knocking him backward. Pete Townsend, standing just feet away, was caught in the crossfire. The explosion damaged his right ear so severely that he lost nearly 90% of his hearing in it. The ringing never stopped. For the rest of his life, Townsend would suffer from tinnitus, a painful condition that he later said made performing excruciating. And then, in the midst of the chaos, came the moment that made music history. Surrounded by smoke and stunned performers, Townsend grabbed the nearest guitar, Tom Smothers' acoustic, and smashed it to pieces right there on live television. Tom, clearly shocked, just stood there, staring in disbelief. It was pure, unscripted rebellion, the perfect ending to a moment that blurred the lines between performance and protest. This wasn't just spectacle, it was a cultural flashpoint. The explosion and guitar smash symbolized everything the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour stood for: unpredictability, defiance, and the power of art to shock the system. Older viewers were horrified, younger audiences were electrified, parents scolded, and teenagers cheered. The performance sparked debate across the country and instantly became a defining moment of the counterculture era. More than just noise and smoke, that performance marked a generational rupture. It captured a raw truth that the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour embraced each week. The times were changing, and no drumbeat, or TV network, could muffle the sound of a cultural revolution. Behind the laughter, tensions with CBS were boiling. The brothers' daring political material rattled sponsors and infuriated executives. Even President Lyndon Johnson wasn't amused. He reportedly stayed up until 3 a.m. to demand the network rein him in. Nixon's White House also pressured CBS, viewing the show as a threat. In 1968, CBS pulled a segment featuring Harry Belafonte performing "Lord Don't Stop the Carnival" over footage of police brutality at the Democratic National Convention. Worse, they sold the censored footage as airtime to the Republican Party for campaign ads. CBS then tightened the screws. Every script, joke, and song had to be approved 10 days in advance. Censors combed through each word, axing anything political, religious, or remotely controversial. Writers were stuck in an endless loop of edits. It was, as they called it, death by 1,000 cuts. Tom and Dick fought back the only way they knew how, through satire. As CBS tightened its grip on the show, demanding advance approval of every script, song, and joke, the brothers turned the spotlight on the very censorship that threatened to silence them. They crafted a biting sketch in which Tom played a CBS censor wielding a giant pair of scissors, maniacally cutting up scripts, tearing through cue cards, and literally snipping the dialogue mid-sentence. The punchline: nothing, just silence. The screen went blank, a haunting metaphor for what censorship was doing not just to their show, but to television itself. It was sharp, brilliant, and devastating. But CBS didn't laugh. They flat out refused to air it. Around the same time, another sketch starring Elaine May faced a similar fate. In it, she delivered a quietly powerful line: "If we're not allowed to say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes." It cut deep, too deep, apparently, for CBS executives. That sketch also never made it to air. Publicly, CBS cited concerns about tone and appropriateness. Privately, internal memos revealed the truth. The network feared the message was damaging to their image and authority. What made these sketches so threatening wasn't just the content, it was the intent. Tom and Dick weren't just pushing boundaries, they were questioning who got to draw them in the first place. By turning censorship into the butt of the joke, they exposed how absurd and dangerous it had become. They showed viewers that what they weren't allowed to see said more than what actually aired. These skits marked a shift. The Smothers Brothers weren't just entertainers anymore, they had become resistance figures. And the network knew it. The fact that CBS responded not with dialogue, but with silence and suppression, only proved the brothers' point. Their humor had crossed the line, because it was finally pointing at the line itself. By April 1969, CBS had enough. They accused the brothers of missing a tape deadline and canceled the show, despite it being one of the top 10 shows in America. The real reason? Politics, not punctuality. Public backlash was swift. The New York Times ran an editorial slamming CBS. Protests, letters, and support from artists and politicians poured in. But the decision stood. Tom put it bluntly: "They're not just shutting down our show. They're trying to shut down the truth. In 1973, the brothers won a lawsuit against CBS for breach of contract. The judge awarded them $776,300, over $5 million today. It was a historic victory for free speech on television. But by then, the damage was done. The brothers had lost their platform. After their CBS exit, the Smothers Brothers tried to reignite the spark. In 1970, they moved to ABC, but the network played it safe, and the show fizzled. A 1975 NBC revival started strong. Its debut was the 5th most watched show in America, but backstage drama and creative limits led to another cancellation. It wasn't until 1988, almost 20 years after CBS had axed them, that the network invited them back for a reunion special. It was a softer version of their former selves, but it was well received and even earned 3 Emmy nominations. A full revival followed in 1989 but didn't last long. Times had changed. Audiences had moved on. Still, the brothers' legacy endured. In the fall of 2022, UC Santa Barbara's Performing Arts Collection accepted the Smothers Brothers' entire archive, contracts, scripts, music, photos, and more. Curator David Subert called it worthy of the Library of Congress. It wasn't just a collection of memorabilia. It was a record of resistance. Long before Saturday Night Live, the Smothers Brothers proved that comedy could challenge power. They spoke truth to a divided nation, about war, censorship, and generational change. Their writers went on to shape shows like All in the Family, SNL, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and later voices like Jon Stewart, John Oliver, and Stephen Colbert. Bill Maher summed it up: they weren't trying to please everyone. They showed that comedy could take a stand, and that it could matter. Tom once said, "We won the lawsuit, but we lost the culture war." It's a haunting truth. Though they struck a blow for free speech, their boldest days were behind them. Advertisers had delivered a message that echoed across the industry: speak too freely and you'll pay the price. But they didn't just leave behind cancelled shows or court cases. They left a blueprint, a reminder that comedy isn't just about laughter. It's about truth, risk, and sometimes, rebellion. The Smothers Brothers were more than comedians. They were trailblazers, standing at the intersection of art and activism. And in an era desperate for comfort, they chose courage instead. Their legacy didn't just influence future entertainers. It fundamentally changed the way television could operate. Before them, variety shows avoided controversy like the plague. After them, it became possible, even expected, for comedy to challenge power. Their writing staff alone became a breeding ground for revolutionary talent. Steve Martin got his start in the Smothers Brothers writers' room. So did Rob Reiner, Bob Einstein, and a young Canadian named Lorne Michaels, who would go on to create Saturday Night Live. These writers took the baton and ran with it, shaping shows that would define satire for generations. The DNA of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour can be traced through SNL, The Daily Show, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and The Colbert Report. And it wasn't just about politics. The show also created space for countercultural art and music to live on mainstream television. They gave a platform to voices that had been banned or blacklisted, artists who were too radical, too strange, or too outspoken for the primetime spotlight. Acts like Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, Jefferson Airplane, and the Who didn't just perform, they testified. In the fall of 2022, the brothers' impact was formally recognized when UC Santa Barbara accepted their complete archive, scripts, legal documents, photos, recordings, into its performing arts collection. David Subert, the curator, said the collection deserved a place alongside the Library of Congress. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a historic preservation of the moment when television became a tool of resistance. Long before political comedy was trendy or marketable, the Smothers Brothers used humor as a hammer to crack the wall between entertainment and activism. They paid the price, but they opened the door. And they left it wide open for the next generation to walk through.